never thought I'd be the one pouring my heart out on Reddit for a bunch of strangers to read. But life, man, life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. I'm Mark, and I've been married to Emma for 10 years now. We have 2 incredible daughters, and from the outside, everything looked flawless. The house, the family, the perfect suburban life. But something's been off. Really off. Emma started pulling away, becoming distant. Like there was an invisible wall between us. It was that kind of coldness where you just know something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. At first, I thought it was work stress. She has this high-powered job at a marketing firm. Me? A while back, I made the choice to step back from my career and focus on the kids. I thought it would be the right move. Yeah, I know. I'm that guy. The one who gave up his job to be Mr. Mom. Go ahead, laugh. I get it. But honestly, I didn't mind. I loved spending time with the girls, and I thought Emma and I were a team. Partners. But I was wrong. So wrong. Everything changed one morning when Emma accidentally left her phone on the kitchen counter. She'd been acting strange with it lately, always turning the screen away when I was nearby. But I never said anything. Dumb, right? But that day, she left it behind, and something inside me, call it a gut feeling, told me to check it. So I did. And there it was. Plain as day. Messages from some guy named James. And these weren't just work-related texts. These were filled with enough emotion to make my stomach churn. One message said, "Last night was amazing," followed by a bunch of heart emojis. Another one read, "Can't wait until we're together again." My heart sank. Felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Couldn't even move. I just stared at the screen, feeling like everything I knew was falling apart. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. That would have been too easy. Too simple for her. Instead, I sat with it. Let it marinate in my mind. I had to know more. Was it just this James guy? Was this a short fling? Or something deeper? What was her endgame? So, I hired a private investigator, a guy who wouldn't ask too many questions. I gave him what little I knew, handed over Emma's schedule, and let him do the rest. The following weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Every time Emma smiled at me, or kissed the girls goodnight, I couldn't help but wonder how long she'd been living this double life. How long had she been lying to me? Why was I the last one to find out? Turns out, she'd been sleeping with James for months. The investigator showed me pictures of them, at hotels, at restaurants, acting like 2 teenagers in love. But it wasn't just physical. Their messages were full of plans for the future. They were talking about leaving for Europe, taking my daughters with them, and leaving me behind. That's when the anger hit. I could have handled the cheating. I'd been in denial for months. But the idea of her taking my kids? That crossed a line I wasn't willing to tolerate. That was a declaration of war. But I knew I couldn't just explode. Emma thought she had me fooled. She thought she could play me like a sucker. So I played along. Pretended everything was fine, while she kept her affair going. I even tried being extra loving, extra present, just to keep her off balance. I needed time. Time to set up my move. And then I found out there was another guy. Ethan. Another colleague of hers. She'd been using him for emotional support while keeping James around for the physical stuff. Apparently, one wasn't enough to satisfy her. That's when I started getting clever. I knew James had a reputation for being a player, and Emma, well, she'd always had some insecurities about his loyalty. So, I planted the idea in her head that James might be seeing someone else. A few strategic whispers. Some anonymous texts to Emma. Nothing major, just enough to make her paranoid. And it worked. She started acting off. Always on edge. Always checking her phone. Getting frustrated with James. Meanwhile, I was the perfect husband. Smiling through the lies, just waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment came sooner than I expected. I managed to turn Ethan against James, making both of them suspicious of Emma's relationship with the other. I began slipping in fake messages, planting seeds of jealousy between them, just enough to make both of them question her loyalty. I was setting the stage for everything in her world to come crashing down. And she had no idea. It was only a matter of time before her whole life fell apart. But I had to be patient. I had to wait for everything to align perfectly. Every little detail had to be in place. No room for mistakes. When I finally made my move, there'd be no turning back. Where was I? Oh yeah, the slow burn. I kept playing the clueless husband while Emma's web of lies unraveled before me. The tension in our home became unbearable. It was thick in the air like you could slice it with a knife. I'm sure she felt it too, but she had no idea what was causing it. Maybe she wondered if I was catching on or if I was still just as clueless as she hoped. But I kept up the act. Watching her squirm, seeing her second-guess every little thing. It became almost entertaining. I knew exactly what was happening behind closed doors, while she thought she was hiding it from me. The investigator kept sending me updates. Texts, photos, even recordings of Emma's conversations when she thought no one was listening. And the worst part? The things she said about me when she thought I couldn't hear. If I had any respect for her left, it would have vanished in an instant. She talked about me to James like I was some dull, invisible man she couldn't wait to leave behind. She complained about how I'd lost my edge, how I wasn't the man she married anymore. Meanwhile, I was the one at home, raising our kids, keeping everything together so she could chase her career. But to her, I was nothing, less than nothing. Fine. She didn't know it yet, but I was done playing nice. It wasn't just about James anymore. No, Emma had been distancing herself more and more, even spending less and less time at home. And the worst part? The girls were starting to pick up on it too. Mia, our oldest, started asking why Mommy wasn't around as much. That hurt. It hurt in a way nothing else had. It wasn't just the cheating now, it was how it was affecting our kids. That's when I realized I couldn't keep pretending any longer. I had to act. I couldn't let this drag on. Not when she was planning to take my girls halfway around the world to live with that bastard. Things finally came to a head one night, after the girls were tucked into bed. Emma came home late, just like she had the past few nights. No real explanation, just the usual story about work and dinners with clients. I went along with it, asking her how her night had been, smiling like an idiot. But inside, I was absolutely boiling. I was done. Couldn't hold back anymore. I had to make her uncomfortable. I had to make her squirm. So, I asked her if she ever felt guilty about being away from the girls so much. Her eyes flickered, like I'd caught her off guard. But she quickly covered it up. Mark, come on. I'm doing this for us. You know how demanding my job is. I nodded, like I believed her. But something inside me snapped. Yeah, but it feels like you're not just working late anymore. Feels like you don't even want to be here. She shot me a look, narrowing her eyes. What are you implying? I shrugged, keeping it casual. I don't know. Just feels like we're drifting apart. You don't feel that too? She turned away from me, her discomfort obvious. Good. That's exactly what I wanted. But I wasn't going to show her all my cards just yet. Not until I was ready to make my move. Maybe we should talk about it, I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. You know, talk about where this is all going. I don't want us to lose each other. That made her hesitate just for a second. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, probably wondering if I knew more than I was letting on. She stayed quiet for a while before finally forcing a smile. Yeah, maybe we should. It was so fake, so obvious, I could hardly believe it. She had no clue. I was already 10 steps ahead of her. I let the conversation trail off, knowing I had to be patient. I had to wait for the right moment to really strike. Here's the thing, though, I wasn't just going after Emma. No, I was going after both of her precious boyfriends, James and Ethan. The next day, I put my plan into motion. I had more than enough dirt to ruin Emma's life, but that wasn't enough. I needed to make her feel the exact same betrayal, the exact same crushing pain that I'd been living with for weeks. So I reached out to a guy who worked with James, a mutual acquaintance of ours, known for his love of gossip. I made sure he overheard a conversation about James seeing someone else behind Emma's back. It didn't take long for the gossip to reach her. She started acting paranoid, constantly checking her phone, jumping at every little noise. Watching her spiral was almost satisfying. Meanwhile, I fed just enough information to Ethan to get him suspicious too. He already had his own insecurities about his relationship with Emma. Before long, both of them were second-guessing everything. Emma's entire world was beginning to crumble, and she had no idea that I was the one pulling all the strings. But just when I thought everything was locked down, I discovered something that almost derailed everything. Emma had already hired a divorce lawyer. She had beaten me to the punch. That's when I realized how far ahead she thought she was. She was planning to file first, paint me as the bad husband, and take full custody of the kids, leaving me with nothing. The house, the money, the girls, they were all part of her scheme to push me out of her life. It wasn't just about leaving me anymore. It was about destroying me. I saw it all so clearly now. If I didn't act fast, she'd have the upper hand. I couldn't let her file first, not when the courts almost always favor mothers in custody cases, especially when she had a lawyer already lined up. Things were about to get ugly. So I made the call to my lawyer. I laid out everything, every piece of evidence, every sordid detail of her affairs. I told him we needed to move quickly. The very next morning, we filed for divorce. The look on Emma's face when she was served? Absolutely priceless. She came home that night furious. Her anger barely contained after the girls were asleep. She marched right over to me. "What the hell, Mark? You filed for divorce?" she asked, stunned. I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my cool, though inside I was practically buzzing with anticipation. "Yeah, I thought it was time. Don't you?" Her eyes burned with rage, but she tried to play it calm. "You're making a huge mistake. I've already talked to a lawyer. You won't win this." I stood up, walked over to her, and stared her down. "Emma, you don't even know what game you're playing." She blinked, caught off guard for just a moment. That was when I knew I had her. Everything she thought she controlled, everything she believed she could walk away from, was about to crumble. And she had no idea how deep she was in. But soon she'd find out. The look on her face when I said those words, the shock, the confusion, was worth every moment of pain I'd endured. For just a second, I thought she might crack and confess everything. But I quickly realized she wasn't that type of person. No, Emma wasn't going to go down without a fight. "What the hell are you talking about, Mark?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You think you can just file for divorce and walk away with everything? You're delusional." I crossed my arms, keeping my composure while inside I was fired up. "I know everything, Emma. I've got the evidence. I've got witnesses. You've been sleeping with James and Ethan." For a split second, I saw her eyes widen, but she quickly regained her anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," she shot back. That's when I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the pictures. "You want to see them?" I asked, my voice cold, calculated. "I've got pictures, text messages, video recordings, everything. You thought I was too dumb to figure it out. Thought I wouldn't catch on." She froze, her mind clearly scrambling to figure out how to talk her way out of this. But there was no way out. She knew it. I knew it. Her anger flared again, but now it was more about self-preservation than anything else. "You think this is all on me? Mark, we haven't had a real marriage in years. You stopped caring about me, about us." I couldn't help but laugh, but it was bitter, filled with disbelief. "Really? So, because I wasn't good enough for you, you had to find comfort in two other men's arms? That's your excuse?" I shook my head in disgust. "Give me a break, Emma. I've been here, doing everything for this family, raising our daughters, while you've been off playing house with whoever crosses your path." She tried to cut me off, but I wasn't having it. "Don't try to turn this around," I snapped. "You never understood me. Not once." Her voice shook, but I saw right through it. "I didn't ask for this life," she continued, voice trembling. "I didn't want to be stuck in this boring suburban prison with someone who has no ambition." I was seething now. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. Unbelievable. "You've been planning this from the start, haven't you? Running off to Europe with James, taking my girls, and leaving me behind like an afterthought." Her face went pale. That was it. The moment I saw her realize I knew everything, I knew I had her. She stood there, stunned for a few seconds, like the weight of her lies finally hit her. But I could tell she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. You think you're going to win this, Mark? Her voice was a low hiss, full of venom. You think you'll get custody? The courts always side with the mother. And I've already got a lawyer who's going to crush you. You'll be left with nothing. I leaned in, keeping my voice calm but sharp. Maybe. But there's one thing you've forgotten, Emma. I'm not the only one with something to lose. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping in. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and showed her a thread of text messages between James and Ethan, the two men she thought she could keep in the dark. I made sure they knew everything. James and Ethan aren't happy with you, Emma? I said coolly, watching her face go from confident to panicked. When you juggle two guys, things tend to fall apart eventually. And trust me, neither of them is too thrilled right now. In fact, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to take the stand in court and share their version of things, about your little side hobbies. Her expression shifted, and for the first time I saw real fear. Not anger, not frustration, just fear. It was like the realization hit her that she was cornered. You wouldn't, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I shrugged, indifferent. Why wouldn't I? You really think I care about anything to do with you anymore? I'm done, Emma. I've got nothing to lose but you. You, on the other hand, have everything to lose. Your career, your reputation, your kids. Everything. I could see her starting to panic. Her breath quickened. Her eyes darted around. She was losing it. Mark, please, she pleaded, her voice softening, her last-ditch effort to appeal to me. We don't have to do this. I smirked, cold and distant. Oh, trust me, we do. She moved a little closer, clearly switching gears to try and soften me up. Think about the girls. Do you really want them caught up in this mess? Do you want them stuck in the middle of all this chaos? Her words hit me harder than I expected. She had a point. The girls didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. They didn't deserve to be dragged into our broken marriage. But I wasn't backing down now. Not after all the lies. Not after everything she'd done. I'm doing this for them, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not going to let you take them from me. I'm not going to stand here while you run off with some guy and pretend everything's okay. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't buying it. It was just another performance. She was trapped and she knew it. I had all the cards now. I had the evidence. And if she tried to push me any further, I was ready to burn everything she cared about to the ground. She inhaled sharply, barely whispering, Fine. What do you want? This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. She was finally realizing she wasn't going to get away with everything. I want full custody of the kids, I said firmly, locking eyes with her. I want the house. And I want you to walk away without trying to take everything from me. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her. Don't even think about fighting me on this, I warned. You know I'll bring James and Ethan into the courtroom if I have to. You'll be humiliated. And I promise, they'll be more than willing to testify if it means saving themselves. Her mouth snapped shut, and I could see the battle within her. She wanted to fight, but deep down, she knew she'd lost. Not this time. Okay, she muttered bitterly, her voice full of resentment. I'll sign the papers. But I wasn't finished yet. One more thing, I added, making sure my voice cut through. You're going to tell the girls the truth. You explain to them exactly why this is happening. They deserve to know the reality of what's been going on. She glared at me, but I didn't care. After everything she'd put us through, this was the least she could do. Fine, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. But don't think for a second that this is over, Mark. You might have won this round, but we'll see how it plays out in court. I didn't need to say anything. I already knew I had won. No matter what she threw at me, I was holding the power. As she stormed out, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't over, but I was finally in control. I played the long game and it was paying off. I knew Emma wouldn't just give up. She'd be plotting, trying to find a way to get one last shot in. And, sure enough, the next day she met with her lawyer again. How did I know? My private investigator was still keeping tabs on her. gathering every bit of dirt I could use to bury her if she tried anything. The day after our confrontation, my lawyer called. He told me Emma's lawyer had reached out, saying they were preparing for a brutal custody battle. Apparently, Emma had changed her mind overnight and now wanted to drag me through the mud. She was betting the court would side with her, simply because she was the mother. She was already plotting to paint me as the lazy stay-at-home dad who had no income, the guy who couldn't provide for the kids. Typical Emma, always thinking she could spin the narrative to make herself look like the victim. But what she didn't know was how much I had dug into her double life. It wasn't just James and Ethan. Thanks to my investigator, I found out that Emma had been seeing other men on the side. She wasn't just a cheater. She was a serial cheater, going from one affair to the next without any regard for the destruction she was leaving behind. I sat down with my lawyer and laid everything out. The texts, the photos, the videos, even the audio recordings of their conversations. We were ready for war. If she wanted to take this to court, I was prepared to burn her entire world to the ground. A week passed, and the tension in our house became unbearable. Emma was avoiding me, barely acknowledging my presence. But every time she looked at me, I could see the hatred simmering beneath the surface. She was planning something, I could feel it. And then, one morning, when I least expected it, she dropped the bomb. As I was making breakfast for the girls, Emma walked in with an air of finality. "I'm moving out," she said, her voice flat, like she was discussing something as trivial as picking up groceries. "I found an apartment." I looked up from the stove, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Really? That quick?" She didn't even look at me, just shrugged like she couldn't care less. "Yeah, James is helping me. We're moving in together." Just like that, no hesitation, no remorse. She had no problem leaving behind everything we'd built, no second thoughts about the life we shared or our daughters. They were nothing more than an inconvenience to her. I kept my voice steady, even though I was boiling inside. "What about the girls? Are you planning to take them with you?" Finally, she faced me, exhaling dramatically as though she was burdened by the weight of the question. "We'll figure it out in court, Mark. But you can't give them what I can. You don't have a job, you don't have any income. How are you going to provide for them?" I clenched my jaw, holding back the fury bubbling up inside. She was playing dirty, just as I expected, but I wasn't going to fall for it. I wasn't going to let her bait me into a fight. I had to stay calm, keep my focus on what mattered. "They're my daughters, Emma," I said, voice cold. "I've been the one raising them while you've been off chasing every man you could find. I'm not going to let you take them from me." She rolled her eyes dismissively, but I saw the flicker of anger in her eyes. "We'll see what the court thinks about that." And with that, she turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, struggling to keep my cool. But I knew I had to keep it together. I wouldn't let her win this. A few days later, the court hearing began. My lawyer had filed everything. My case for full custody, the evidence of her multiple affairs, and her plans to run off to Europe with James and the girls. I was on edge, my nerves shot, but I was ready. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. When Emma walked in with her lawyer, I couldn't help but notice how she strutted into the courtroom. She looked like she was at some high-profile event, dressed to impress, trying to sell herself as the successful career woman. James wasn't with her, probably smart enough to stay out of the spotlight. But even without him there, I could feel his presence, like a shadow hanging over everything, as if he was there with her in spirit. The first part of the hearing was a nightmare. Her lawyer spun an elaborate tale about how Emma was the primary breadwinner, how I had no job, no income, how I couldn't possibly provide a stable home for our kids. They painted me as the failure, someone who abandoned his career to stay home with the kids, incapable of supporting them. Every word felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to explode, to scream, to show how wrong they were. But I stayed calm. I didn't let them see the anger churning inside me. I let them lie, because I knew what was coming next. Then it was my lawyer's turn. Calm, collected, he started laying out the truth. He presented the evidence, one piece at a time, showing Emma's betrayal. First with James, then Ethan, then the other men. He showed the court the text messages, the photos, the receipts. He painted a picture of a woman who wasn't just unfaithful but reckless enough to make plans for the future with someone who wasn't even there to defend her in court. And then came the knockout punch. We called James to the stand. The second his name was called, Emma went pale. She hadn't known he would be a witness. James tried to hold it together, but it was clear he was sweating. Under questioning, he admitted to the affair, confessed that he and Emma had been involved for months. But the real bombshell came when he admitted that Emma had been planning to take the kids and leave me behind. That was a devastating blow to Emma's case. The moment James stepped down, she looked like she'd been hit by a truck. But I wasn't done. Next up was Ethan. His testimony was just as damning. He confirmed everything James said, and by the time he was finished, Emma's entire defense had collapsed. The judge stayed neutral, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't buying Emma's perfect mother act anymore. When the hearing ended, Emma stormed out of the courtroom, her face contorted with fury. I followed my lawyer out, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and triumph. The battle wasn't over, but today had been a huge victory. Emma knew it, and the best part? She had done it to herself. All the lies, all the manipulation, it had all crumbled beneath her. The weight of it felt like a heavy burden lifting off my shoulders. As I walked out of the courthouse, I finally felt like I was getting my life back. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. There were more battles ahead. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The final hearing was scheduled a few weeks later, and the tension in the house between Emma and me reached a boiling point. We still had to share the same space, making every day feel like I was living in a pressure cooker, just waiting for it to explode. I counted down the days, but I knew better than to relax. Emma was backed into a corner, but I could feel she wasn't finished yet. I could sense she was plotting something, I just didn't know what. The night before the final hearing, I was sitting in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, trying to unwind for once. Emma walked in, her presence filling the doorway. She stood there for a few moments, just watching me, like she was trying to gather her thoughts. "Mark," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. "Can we talk?" I didn't even flinch, but my mind immediately went on high alert. "Talk about what, Emma? You've already made your choices." She let out a long sigh and sank into the chair across from me. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and we sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then she finally spoke. "I don't want this to get any worse than it already has. We don't need to drag each other through the mud in court tomorrow." I couldn't help it. A bitter chuckle escaped. "Now you want to keep things civil? After everything you've done? After trying to rip the girls out of my life?" She flinched at the sting of my words, but I wasn't going to let her shift the blame. "Not this time. Mark," she began, her voice thin, almost pleading. "I know I messed up, but we can still work something out. For the kids' sake, we don't need to make this a war." I saw through her act immediately. This wasn't about the kids. It was about her image. She was scrambling, trying to salvage whatever dignity she thought she had left. I set my glass down with a sharp thud, leaning forward. "You're only saying this because you know the judge has already seen through you. Tomorrow it's over. You made your choice, Emma. You've already lost." Her face flushed, and for a moment, I could see the anger burning in her eyes. She stood up abruptly, fists clenched, her entire body tense with frustration. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you?" she snapped, her voice rising. "Like you've never made mistakes. You know what? I wouldn't have done any of this if you hadn't checked out of our marriage years ago." There it was again. Her attempt to rewrite history to make herself the victim. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate me this time. "I didn't check out, Emma," I said, keeping my voice level. "I was right here, every damn day. You're the one who decided to look for comfort in other men. You're the one who thought you could juggle a career, affairs, and a family without consequences. But you can't have it all. You never could." She stood there, shaking with anger, her chest heaving with each breath. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stayed still for a moment, staring at the door she had just slammed. It was like a line had been drawn in the sand, A definitive end to something that had been unraveling for years. The next morning, we were back in the courtroom. I sat there, composed, while Emma's lawyer scrambled to save face. But I could see from the start that the judge wasn't buying her story. My lawyer presented the final pieces of evidence. More damning texts, more incriminating photos, more irrefutable proof of Emma's affairs. And then came the video, the one where Emma openly discussed her plans to leave me and take the kids with her. The judge's face remained impassive, but his tone said everything. After reviewing the evidence, he began, his voice steady. It is clear that Mrs. Thompson's actions have not been in the best interest of the children. Her extramarital relationships and her plans to relocate the children without Mr. Thompson's consent are deeply concerning. He paused briefly before continuing. Therefore, I am granting full custody of the children to Mr. Thompson, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Thompson. Additionally, Mr. Thompson will retain ownership of the family home, and the division of assets will reflect Mrs. Thompson's lack of contribution to the household. I barely heard the rest. All I could think was, I won. The fight was over. I had won custody of my daughters. I had won my life back. Emma sat there, stunned, unable to process what was happening. She looked at the judge as if she couldn't believe it was real. But it was. As we left the courtroom, Emma refused to even look at me. She walked out with her lawyer, her back straight, her head high. But I saw it, the way her shoulders sagged the moment she was out of view. The confident facade was gone. She was breaking down, and there was no one left to blame but herself. Back at the house, I started packing up her things. It felt surreal, like I was in some kind of dream. The end of everything we once had. The end of the war that had been dragging on for far too long. The girls were staying with my parents for the week, so the house was quiet, empty. I went through her things. Clothes, jewelry, makeup, the little reminders of a life we'd shared. A life that no longer existed. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness. But mostly, I felt a profound sense of freedom. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, sipping my whiskey and reflecting on everything that had brought me to this point. The lies, the betrayal, the months of pretending nothing was wrong while I quietly prepared my defense. It had been exhausting, brutal, but in the end, I had come out on top. I fought for my daughters. I fought for my life. And I won. I don't know what the future holds for Emma, and frankly, I don't care. She'll have her supervised visits with the girls, but perhaps one day, she'll realize what she threw away. As for me, I'm moving forward. A fresh start with my girls by my side. That's all that matters. This whole experience has taught me one thing. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about taking back control of your own life, standing up for yourself, and reclaiming what's yours. I didn't just get even with Emma. I took back everything she tried to strip away from me. My dignity, my family, my future. And that's the real victory. Thanks for reading, Reddit. This chapter of my life is closed, and I'm ready to move on.